Sadly, for centuries, false accusations and deliberate misinformation have been used as tools of oppression, fueling racial tensions and leading to devastating consequences for Black communities. From the Reconstruction era to the period of the Civil Rights Movement and beyond, lies and distortions have been exploited to justify violence, discrimination, and systemic injustice. This compilation examines 10 pivotal cases where white lies have led to destructive outcomes, shedding light on the enduring impact of these events and honoring the memories of victims. By confronting this painful history, we can work towards a future built on truth, accountability, and racial equality. But before we delve in, consider subscribing to our channel. If you're yet to, like, comment, and spread our eye-opening Black narratives. Together, let's educate, inspire, and empower each other to build a more just and equitable society. Going forward, now let us explore some gruesome and heart-wrenching examples where racial falsehoods led to the destruction of Black lives, families, and in some cases, an entire Black community. 1. The brutal murder of Mary Turner, her husband, and their unborn child. On May 16, 1918, a tragic event unfolded in Brooks County, Georgia. Hampton Smith, a notorious white farmer, was killed. Smith was well known for exploiting Black farm workers, bailing them out of jail for petty crimes, and forcing them to work off debts on his farm. The death of Hampton Smith led to a series of investigations, as it was evident in his body that he died as a result of a fatal shooting. As the community grappled with grief, investigations commenced, leading to the arrest of several Black men, including Hayes Turner. During the interrogations, a white mob influenced the narrative, falsely accusing Hayes Turner of, and the other Blacks. The mob had cited a past land dispute between Turner and Smith some days back, although it was resolved peacefully. This unfounded claim sparked racial tensions and sealed Turner's fate. They claimed Turner was the mastermind of the murder, while the other Blacks conspired with him. Turner, alongside several others, were found guilty, despite the issue lacking concrete evidence. The mob's rage and racial bias sealed his fate. And on May 18, 1918, Hayes Turner and several others were lynched by a white mob. His body was found hanging from a tree, brutally beaten and shot. Grieving and outraged, Mary Turner publicly denounced her husband's lynching and vowed to seek justice. The white mob, fearing she would expose their crimes, targeted her next. On May 19, 1918, a white mob from Brooks County, Georgia, would lynch Mary Turner, who was 8 months pregnant then, at Folsom's Bridge, 16 miles north of Valdosta, for speaking publicly against the lynching of her husband the day before. The mob would bind her feet, hang her from a tree with her head facing down, throw gasoline on her, and burn the clothes off her body. Mrs. Turner was still alive when the mob took a large butcher's knife to her abdomen, cutting the unborn baby from her body. When the baby fell off Mary Turner's womb, a member of the mob would crush the crying baby's head with his foot. The mob then riddled Mrs. Turner's body with hundreds of bullets, killing her finally. Looking at the processes towards the death of one person, a pregnant woman for that matter, one can't help but wonder what kind of monsters these were. What kind of hellish hate could have propelled them towards such untellable cruelty? After the brutal killings, Sidney Johnson, a Black man, would confess to killing Hampton Smith. Johnson, who had been working to pay off a fine for rolling dice, a minor offense, had gotten into a quarrel with Smith and fatally shot him. Now to the next. 2. The gruesome murder of Emmett Till. Young Emmett Till, a 14-year-old African-American, traveled from Chicago to Money, Mississippi in August 1955. His destination was the humble home of his great-uncle and great-aunt, Mose and Elizabeth Wright. During a normal hangout on August 24, 1955, Emmett Till, while standing with his cousins and some friends outside a country store in Money, bragged that his girlfriend back home was white. Emmett's African-American companions, disbelieving him, dared Emmett to ask the white woman sitting behind the store counter for a date. He went in, bought some candy, and on his way out was heard saying, "Bye, baby." There were no witnesses in the store, but Carolyn Bryan, the white woman behind the counter, later claimed that the young lad had grabbed her, made lewd advances, and wolf whistled at her as he sauntered out. 4 days later, Roy Bryant returned from a business trip, and on hearing how Emmett had allegedly spoken to his wife, he and his half-brother J.W. Milam went to the home of Till's great-uncle, Mose Wright, in the early morning hours of August 28, 1955. The pair demanded to see the boy. Despite pleas from Wright, they forced Emmett into their car, and after driving around in the night, they had the little boy beaten mercilessly and shot to death. As if this wasn't enough, they dumped his body in the Tallahatchie River. 3 days later, his corpse was discovered, but was so disfigured that Mose Wright could only identify it by a ring that Emmett Till normally wore. The white authorities wanted to bury the body quickly in order to conceal the inhumane act, but Till's mother, Mamie Bradley, requested the body be sent back to Chicago in order to seek justice for her son's death. Tragically, the damage has been done. No amount of violence or justice could bring back the youngster's life. His life, filled with promise and potential, was brutally cut short by a blatant lie. His aspirations and dreams for the future were shattered, leaving a lasting impact on his family and community. 3. The Wilmington Insurrection of 1898. In the late 19th century, Wilmington, North Carolina, was a thriving city with a significant African-American population. Despite facing racial tensions, Black residents had made notable economic and political progress. However, this advancement was perceived as a threat by some white supremacists, and just one fabrication lit the fuse, and the delicate balance of power was disrupted. In 1989, a sensationalized article titled "A Declaration of Independence" appeared in the Wilmington Daily Record, a Black-owned newspaper. The piece, written by Alex Manley, a Black editor, addressed issues like racial equality and lynching. White supremacists distorted its message, claiming Manley advocated for interracial relationships. This fabricated narrative spread like wildfire, fueling racial animosity. White Democrats, seeking to regain control, exploited these tensions. They launched a campaign of misinformation, falsely accusing Black Republicans of planning an armed uprising. On Election Day, November 8, 1989, white supremacists intimidated Black voters, preventing many from casting ballots. The following day, a group of armed white men, including members of the Red Shirts, a paramilitary organization, marched through Wilmington's Black neighborhoods. This march led to an eruption of intense violence. The mob attacked Black residents, businesses, and homes. The insurrection resulted in the deaths of at least 60 African Americans, with many more injured or displaced. The violence was not spontaneous, it was orchestrated. White leaders had planned the coup, using deception and racial fears to justify their actions. The lies told about Alex Manley's article and the alleged Black uprising served as a pretext for the insurrection. In the aftermath, the city's Black leaders were forced to flee or face imprisonment. The Wilmington insurrection led to the overthrow of the elected fusion government, composed of Black Republicans and white populists. This incident made white Democrats seize power, establishing a segregationist regime that endured for decades. The tragic events of Wilmington underscore the lethal consequences of racial fabrications, where one egregious lie led to the senseless slaughter of innocent lives. 4. The Central Park 5 case, April 19, 1989, will forever be etched in the memory of New York City. On that fateful night, Central Park, a haven of tranquility and recreation, became the scene of a heinous crime. Tricia Maley, a 28-year-old investment banker, was brutally raped and savagely beaten, leaving her clinging to life. The assault was vicious. Tricia suffered severe head injuries, a fractured skull, and was left unconscious. The attack sparked widespread outrage and horror, with the city demanding swift justice for the young professional. As news spread, fears of lawlessness and violence gripped the community. New Yorkers were stunned, questioning the safety of their city's iconic green space. But justice was compromised, racial tensions simmered, and the police were under pressure to solve the case. In the midst of chaos, a lie was born. And just because of that one lie, 5 innocent lives were forever altered. The lie began with the coerced confessions of 5 Black and Latino teenagers: Antron McCray, Kevin Richardson, Yusef Salam, Raymond Santana, and Corey Wise. Detectives leveraged fear, intimidation, and promises of leniency to extract statements from the boys. As the investigation unfolded, racial stereotypes and media frenzy fueled the narrative of wilding Black youth. Headlines like Wolfpack's Prey and Central Park Horror solidified public opinion. The New York police concealed coercion tactics, claiming voluntary confessions. Prosecutors alleged conspiracy, despite lacking physical evidence. The trial was a rush to judgment, relying on questionable confessions and flawed forensic analysis. No DNA evidence linked the five to the crime scene. Yet, they were convicted and sentenced to prison terms ranging from 5 to 15 years. 13 years later, truth prevailed. Matias Reyes, a serial rapist, confessed to the crime. DNA evidence confirmed his guilt. The Central Park Five were the exonerated and their convictions vacated, but the damage was done. 5 young lives were already destroyed by racial bias, coercion, media manipulation, and unsubstantiated lies. 5. The infamous frame-up of Jessie Hunter. From the bruises on her body, it was clear Fannie Taylor had been beaten. The story she told to explain them away destroyed an all-black town in Florida and got several of its residents murdered. On New Year's Day, 1923, Taylor, then 22-year-old wife of a mill worker, said a black man had assaulted her. She didn't say rape, only that she'd been assaulted, but the word assault was interpreted as a sexual violation by the whites in her town of Sumner, Fla. Sumner was just a few miles from Rosewood, an all-black town of about 120 individuals that had seen its own version of white flight after industry left Rosewood and whites moved to Sumner. As word of Taylor's claim spread, some black people in Rosewood who worked in Sumner said the assailant had actually been Taylor's lover, and her story was a cover to spare her husband's wrath, said Maxine Jones, a Florida State University professor of African American history, who co-authored an account of the massacre for the Florida legislature in 1993. While the fear of black-on-white violence had been stoked across the South since the days of slavery, particularly in areas where blacks outnumbered whites, Taylor's claim was especially pernicious. Taylor's claim came within days of a Ku Klux Klan rally near Gainesville, just to the north of Levy County. With tensions high, her words set in motion 6 days of violence in which whites from Sumner and neighboring towns and counties descended on Rosewood, with the intent of finding the alleged assailant, Jessie Hunter, and lynching him. Women and children fled to the woods for safety and waited for days in the cold before local train conductors alerted to the violence sent a train to rescue them. Some nearby kind white families hid their black neighbors to protect them. By January 6, 1923, the town was empty, and so many black people and just 2 whites were dead, and the mob burned down the remains of the town. The black residents of Rosewood scattered, abandoning their property, never to return. No one was ever arrested in the case. Jones of FSU and 5 colleagues wrote the account of the incident in support of a lawsuit against the state of Florida by some of the survivors who had been children at the time.
Because of fear, the massacre had remained a family secret for years,
Jones said,
not knowing who you could trust and believing people with white skin could get back at you.
But one Rosewood descendant, Arnett Doctor, finally decided to speak out and seek redress based on his account and those of surviving eyewitnesses and the Jones report. The Florida legislature approved a $2.1 million settlement in 1994. The governor also issued an apology on behalf of the state for not bringing perpetrators of the destruction to justice, nor sending officials to quell the violence and rescue the innocent. A single lie, fueled by racial hate, destroyed lives. Fannie Taylor's false accusation ravaged Rosewood's black community, leaving innocent lives lost, homes and businesses in ruins, generations scarred. 6. The Gina 6. The case of the Gina 6 exposed racial injustice and inequality following an incident involving 6 male African-American teenagers. The arrest of the students, all enrolled at Gina High School in Gina, Louisiana, ignited a national movement to address long-standing injustices in what has often been referred to as the school-to-prison pipeline of policies and practices that push at-risk African-American children out of classrooms into the juvenile and criminal justice systems. The incident creating the Gina 6 took place on August 31st, 2006, the day after a school assembly where an African-American male freshman, Justin Purvis, asked the school principal, Scott Wyndham, about sitting under a specific tree in the school courtyard. Purvis and other black students sat under the tree, but the following morning they found 3 nooses on the tree. The students and local black residents were alarmed at that discovery, recognizing the historical background associated with the lynching of African Americans in Louisiana and across the nation. They believed the nooses were a message from unknown white supremacists of their feelings and possible intentions toward African American students at Gina High School. What followed was a series of incidents on the school campus, including an arson that generated significant damage to the high school on November 30, 2006. No one was charged with the arson as no culprit was caught, but this event led to both white students and black students watching their backs as they didn't know who was the culprit. In the tense atmosphere of heightened racial tension, an altercation between 6 black Gina High School students and a white male student, Justin Barker, at the school on December 4, 2006. The altercation led to him being taken to the emergency room as he'd sustained severe injuries, while the other 6 black students, Robert Bailey Jr. and Carwin Jones, both 18, Theo Shaw and Bryant Purvis, both 17, Michael Bell, 16, and Jesse Raybeard, 14, were arrested and charged with attempted murder. Justin Barker, a white student, had allegedly provoked a confrontation with the 6 black students. According to eyewitnesses, he used racial slurs and taunted the group, trying to get a rise out of them. The situation escalated when Robert Bailey Jr. approached Barker, asking him to stop the verbal assault. However, instead of de-escalating, the confrontation turned physical, resulting in a brief but intense fight that left Barker with injuries, bruises, cuts, and a concussion. The 6 black students were subsequently charged with attempted second-degree murder and conspiracy. The severity of the charges sparked outrage among the black community and civil rights activists, who argued that the charges were excessive and racially motivated. As the Gina 6 case unfolded, it became painfully clear racial tensions and biases fueled the injustice here. Justin Barker's false claims and racial taunts were given credence, while the black students' accounts were disregarded and trounced. The court initially worked with Barker's narrative alone, thereby discarding the Gina 6's testimony, with their voices silenced, their truth unknown. Despite conflicting accounts, one thing was certain: the Gina 6 felt compelled to defend themselves against Barker's alleged aggression. In the end, the 6 students pleaded guilty to misdemeanor simple battery, avoiding harsher sentences. Michael Bell, initially convicted of a felony, had his conviction overturned. The 6 students were tried individually. The young men received legal assistance and support from the NAACP and the American Civil Liberties Union, especially after all white juries were selected in each case. The charges and subsequent trials of these African American students shed a spotlight on the differing treatment of students by race regarding school discipline. On September 20, 2007, nearly 20,000 protesters marched into Gina, a town of 3,000 residents, calling attention to similar incidents where white students were treated more leniently. Protesters included Reverends Jesse Jackson, Martin Luther King III, and Al Sharpton, and rappers Ice Cube, Salt and Pepper, and Mos Def. National outrage continued to mount as the cases proceeded, garnering more media attention, including from the New York Times, Chicago Tribune, BBC, MTV, and CNN. That heightened awareness played a significant role in the young men having the initial charges of attempted murder reduced, which in turn influenced their sentences. Michael Bell, 16 at the time, was tried as an adult, but his sentence was 18 months in a juvenile facility. The other 5 were charged with simple battery and entered no contest pleas, which resulted in their paying fines, court costs, restitution to Barker's family, and 7 days of probation. Members of Gina 6 have continued to share their experiences of racial injustice in the public school and justice systems. One of the 6, Theo Shaw, even decided to become an attorney because of the incident. 7. The Moores Ford lynching. In 1946, Walton County, Georgia, was a hub of racial tension and violence. The small town of Monroe, with a population of around 2,500 people, was entrenched in segregation and white supremacy. Blacks faced daily humiliation, economic exploitation, and terror. During that period, the local law enforcement often turned a blind eye to violence against African Americans. On July 25, 1946, a white mob lynched 2 black couples near Moores Ford Bridge in Walton County, Georgia, in what has been called the last mass lynching in America. The couples killed were George W. and Mae Murray Dorsey, and Dorothy and Roger Malcolm. Mrs. Malcolm was 7 months pregnant. Mr. Dorsey, a World War II veteran who had served in the Pacific for 5 years, had been home for only 9 months. And on July 11th, 1946, a false accusation by Barnett Hester, a white farmer, ignited a deadly chain of events. Hester claimed Roger Malcolm, a 24-year-old black veteran, stabbed him during an argument. This lie would spread like wildfire, fueling racial hatred that in no time, Roger Malcolm was arrested. 2 weeks later, J. Loy Harrison, the white landowner for whom the Malcolms and the Dorseys sharecropped, drove Mrs. Malcolm and the Dorseys to the jail to post a $600 bond. On their way back to the farm, the car was stopped by a mob of 30 armed, unmasked white men who seized Mr. Malcolm and Mr. Dorsey and tied them to a large oak tree. Mrs. Malcolm recognized one of the members of the mob, and when she called on them by name to spare her husband, the mob seized her and Mrs. Dorsey, and they were shot, beaten, and left hanging from trees. Just because of one lie, the 4 innocent lives were lost. The victims' bodies were later found riddled with bullets and bruises. Mr. Harrison watched as the white men shot all 4 people 60 times at close range, but later he claimed he could not identify any members of the mob. Local authorities and law enforcement failed to intervene, implicitly condoning the violence. The FBI investigated, but a grand jury refused to indict, perpetuating systemic racism. The case remained unsolved, and justice eluded the victims' families. The Moores Ford lynching became a symbol of racial intimidation, casting a long shadow over the civil rights movement. It underscored the deadly consequences of white lies and racial hatred. This horrific event remains a painful reminder of the need to confront systemic racism, challenge white supremacy, and promote truth and accountability. 8. The unjust murder of Amad Arbury. In Syphilis Shores, Georgia, a predominantly white neighborhood, racial tensions simmered beneath the surface. On February 23, 2020, a devastating event would expose the deadly consequences of white lies. Amad Arbury, a 25-year-old black man, jogged through the neighborhood, unaware of the danger lurking ahead. Travis McMichael, a 34-year-old white resident, and his father Gregory, a former police officer, claimed Arbury looked suspicious. They'd said Arbury was a burglary suspect, and both father and son armed themselves and chased him. They falsely believed he matched a description from previous break-ins. Evidence at trial revealed that on February 23, 2020, defendants Travis and Gregory McMichael armed themselves with firearms and chased after Arbury as he jogged past their driveway. The pursuit passed by the home of defendant Roddy Bryan, who got into his own truck and joined the chase, despite the fact that he did not know and had never seen Arbury before. For the next 4 to 5 minutes, the 3 defendants pursued Arbury through the neighborhood, trying to box him in with their trucks. For that entire time, Arbury ran from the defendants, unarmed and with his hands in plain view. He never spoke a word to the defendants and never made any threatening sound or gesture. Rather, he repeatedly tried to run away. Ultimately, after Arbury had already changed direction multiple times, trying to escape from the defendants, Travis McMichael got out of his truck and pointed a shotgun directly at Arbury. When Arbury tried to defend himself, Travis McMichael shot him in the chest. Arbury, wounded, grabbed for the gun. During a struggle over the gun, Travis McMichael fired 2 more shots into Arbury, who then stumbled a few steps and fell face first onto the pavement, where he died in the street. Evidence at the trial revealed that the defendants had strongly held racist beliefs that led them to make assumptions and decisions about Arbury that they would not have made if Arbury were white. The McMichaels spun a web of deceit, claiming self-defense and alleging that Amad had attacked Travis, but evidence contradicted their narrative. Video footage showed Amad jogging peacefully, and witnesses disputed McMichael's account. 9. The Tuskegee Syphilis Study. In 1932, the United States Public Health Service launched a medical experiment in Macon County, Alabama, targeting African-American sharecroppers. They deceived a total number of 600 black people that they would receive free medical care, and hundreds of black men and women participated. The study's purpose was to observe the natural progression of syphilis, a disease ravaging black communities due to poverty and lack of health care. The researchers promised participants bad blood treatment, concealing their true intent. Dr. Eugene Dibble, president of Tuskegee Institute, and Dr. John Charles Cutler, a PHS officer, led the study. They exploited vulnerable black men, withholding treatment and information. The recruitment tactics included free medical exams, meals, and burial insurance. Just because of one lie, that they were being treated, the black men and women remained in the study, unaware of their diagnosis or the deadly consequences. As the study progressed, participants suffered severe symptoms, blindness, paralysis, and dementia. Researchers documented and photographed progress without intervention. Wives and children were infected, and births resulted in congenital syphilis. Despite the availability of penicillin as a standard syphilis treatment in 1947 and the establishment of National Institutes of Health Ethics guidelines in 1966, the study continued for 40 years. In 1972, whistleblower Peter Buxton exposed the study, sparking outrage. Congressional hearings and lawsuits followed, revealing the devastating truth. The Tuskegee syphilis study killed an estimated number of 128 blacks and infected hundreds more. This deliberate act exemplifies the rate of systemic racism in the U.S. and how desperate whites are to eliminate blacks. They had to tell such a fatal lie to lure many to their graves. 10. Dick Roland and Sarah Page's case. In the early 20th century, Tulsa, Oklahoma, was a booming oil town with a thriving African-American community known as Greenwood. This neighborhood was a symbol of black prosperity, with successful businesses, schools, and homes. But on May 30th, 1921, a very tragic incident befell the Greenwood neighborhood. Just because of one lie, the thriving black community was brought to its knees. On May 30, 1921, a fabricated story sparked a chain reaction of violence. Dick Roland, a 19-year-old black shoe shiner, was falsely accused of assaulting Sarah Page, a 17-year-old white elevator operator in the Drexel building. This single lie ignited long-simmering prejudices, and soon, a mob of angry whites gathered outside the courthouse, demanding Roland's lynching. Fearing for his safety, black veterans, including World War I heroes, rallied to protect him. But their efforts were met with resistance from the white mob, and clashes ensued. As the violence escalated, law enforcement failed to intervene, effectively condoning the carnage. The National Guard was eventually called in, but their presence only worsened the situation. Over 2 days, white rioters looted and burned black-owned businesses, homes, and churches in the Greenwood district, known as Black Wall Street. Just because of one lie, an estimated number of 300 black lives were lost, with hundreds more injured. Thousands were left without shelter or livelihoods. The once thriving community was reduced to ashes. The incident between Dick Roland and Sarah Page was not an isolated incident. It was part of a pattern of racial violence and false accusations that plagued the U.S. during the early 20th century. The legacy of deceit and racial violence uncovered in these 10 pivotal cases underscores the devastating consequences of white lies. For centuries, false accusations and deliberate misinformation have been wielded as tools of oppression, perpetuating systemic injustice and destroying countless black lives. As we reflect on these tragic events, we honor the memories of the victims and their families. We acknowledge the resilience and courage of those who have fought against racial terror and continue to seek justice. Together, let's strive for a world where truth triumphs over deceit, justice overpowers injustice, and humanity prevails over hatred. That brings us to the end of yet another video segment. Support our works by hitting the thumb button, share video with friends and families by spreading our eye-opening black narrative, and subscribe to stay with us for more if you are yet to. Thank you for watching, and see you in our next video.